Welcome to Vinexposium podcast on Wines of the Future. Where are we coming from? Where are we now? And where are we heading? My name is Gabrielle Vizzavona, and with top international experts, we'll be discussing the past, present, and future of the wine industry fast-forwarding 50 years. Very pleased to have a chat with Emmanuel Bourguignon for our Wines of the Future talk about soils equilibrium and ecosystem. Hello, Emmanuel.
Hi, Gabrielle. How are you?
Good, and you?
I'm fine, thanks.
A few words, Emmanuel, to introduce you. You have been working as the Director of Development at the Laboratoire d'analyses microbiologiques des sols, LAMS, the Laboratory of Microbiologic Analyses of Soil, since 2010. It is an independent laboratory founded in 1990 by your parents, Claude and Lydia Bourguignon, which were pioneers on soil health and protection and its role in the stability of all terrestrial ecosystems. They have been for more than 30 years raising awareness about soil preservation. You studied soil science in the UK, then you completed a master in soil microbiology at the University of Nancy in France and underwent a Ph.D. at the Bioprotection Research Centre at Lincoln University in New Zealand, focusing on the ecology of soil fungi. The apple does not fall far from the tree, as we say. All that before you joined LAMS in 2008, first as a consultant in soil microbiology, ecology, and agronomy. Your aim is to help your clients set up sustainable agricultural practice which respects soils, their biodiversity, and the environment. In 2010, your family and you started from scratch a vineyard in Cahors, the Domaine Laroque d'Antan, that has gained international recognition. Emmanuel, you sometimes present yourself as a soil doctor. What is it exactly?
Recently, it's been more agreed that soil can be regarded as almost as a living organism, so to speak. We've moved from a two-dimensional approach of soil, which was in the past mostly a physical and chemical approach to the soil. And in the recent decades, the more biological aspect of soil has been put forward. And I will say, like any living organism, you can have so to speak, a medical approach to them if they are, let's say, in poor health. And unfortunately, soils have been quite mistreated in agronomy, in modern agriculture. The way we've approached trying to understand what's going wrong in the soil and how to treat it and how to restore the soil, I suppose we have an approach that is slightly similar to what a doctor will do with a patient, where we spend a fair amount of time with our clients on site, understanding the history of the site, the topography, the context in which the site is located, because this is very important as well to understand the climate, the water regime of the place. And once you add up all those pieces to the puzzle, then you can build up a good strategy in terms of restoring the soil health. That's how I will describe it.
What are the biggest progress that you've witnessed in the past 20 years in terms of soil analysis?
I will say taking into account that soil, the living dimension of a soil, the biological approach, is something that has worldwide gained a lot in the last 20 years for sure. Before, it was really even when I look back at my studies in the early 2000s when I was in the UK, I recall the lectures I had on soil. The part on soil biology was mostly focused on the biology within natural ecosystem, but within a farming system, it was just a light touch on the subject. I would say moving back moving forward 20 years, it's very rare now to read a paper, a scientific paper or a publication that doesn't acknowledge the importance of having healthy soil, as in a high microbial biomass, earthworm populations, and so on. A direct consequence of that is that it is taken into account into soil analysis. We also see parameters as trying to set up indicators, biological indicators that help to know if the soil is in good health or not. In France, we have the national instances that are now working on this, while 20 years ago it was a non-subject, but now it's becoming more and more central.
Your parents, Claude and Lydia, just published a book called Pourquoi ne faisons-nous rien quand la maison brûle, which would translate as Why don't we do anything when the house burns? Which we can suspect by the title is not anticipating a very optimistic scenario for Earth. What is the level of emergency now?
Unfortunately, the level is like super high. But when I mean super high, it's higher than what the media are generally letting us know. I think we are totally underestimating the level of emergency. One of the example of this, if you look at the IPCC report of the latest one, 2022, the scenario they have established as being the one taking place right now was in the previous report a scenario that was considered as the most pessimistic one. And so it just shows you, like, you go back like 20 years and the scenarios that were given, the really pessimistic one, people were saying, oh yeah, but that's super pessimistic. It won't happen. It's not that bad. We are taking good measures to do it. And then as the reports from the IPCC came along and they kept saying, oh, it seems like we are more on those pessimistic scenarios. And again, the scientific world, a lot of people tended to minimize this and say, no, we're going to be able to maintain the average scenario. And on that latest report, 2022, they said the curve we are following is the worst scenario we've anticipated with our algorithm. In 2022, we have crossed two limits. The first one was the amount of pollution with the plastics. Those publication we were reading about, about 10 years ago, there was some publication in the UK mentioning how microplastic were getting into columbola, millipedes, earthworms, and then they were being swallowed by the birds, and it was building up into the food chain. And that had to be a concern in terms of long-term health for mankind as well. And that was like a long time ago. Now, 2022, the Stockholm Watch agency, they've come up and saying, oh, we have exploded that boundary of what they call I think it's foreign particles, like molecules that are not naturally synthesized. And the plastic is the main one. And the second boundary we've crossed this year is the pollution of fresh waterways. So we are seeing those boundaries that are being broken one after the other, and at a rhythm that is far higher than we know. And the other one really important boundary we are destroying completely is the one of biodiversity, species biodiversity. I think it's going to be very hard for us until it's too late, to grasp. High biodiversity means high interaction between the species, and it means higher stability of ecosystems. We talk a lot about resilience. You hear a lot of that word in the media. I think biodiversity is definitely at the basis of resilience in ecosystem, because living organisms, or nature, if you like, if we were to think of nature as an entity, so to speak, life is just the most powerful way to increase stability. The more you have a complex life form and a complex interaction between life forms, the more stable is your ecosystem. As soon as you start to decrease the biodiversity of that ecosystem, its resilience decreases really quickly. And linking back to the soil, what I said earlier on, how soil is the place of the highest biomass, highest microbial diversity, highest diversity of insect and so on. Soil is an area of the ecosystem where you have an enormous amount of biodiversity. And that biodiversity is also being destroyed, being decreased. For the future, it's going to be a little bit dark unless the politics and the super big companies start to realize that what they are doing to this planet is way beyond sustainability, and that we are now borrowing time. I don't see the mankind being able to steer that ship so we don't hit the iceberg. I know it's not fashionable to. It's not. People always want for us to be very positive and give, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and don't worry, technology will bring solutions and so on. If you take that type of stand, you keep thinking you have time, and we look at it tomorrow. And no, we should have been doing this a few years ago. There's been this movie that had a super big buzz, Don't Look Up. It is such a good critique of what's going on currently. I think it sums it up pretty well. Life is full of resources, and the problem in the long run is not so much for planet Earth being able to sustain life. It's more for us, as a habitant of this planet. How long are we going to be able to live on this planet?
With this scenario, how would viticulture would be impacted in the next 50 years?
Viticulture is one of those human activities that has all the keys to be able to maintain and carry on for in the next 150 or 100 years, because if you set up a good viticulture, you can have a very virtuous system in which you lock up carbon because you do photosynthesis with the plant. You're dealing with a perennial plant, so its root system, if it's well established, helps driving water deep into the ground. If you have a viticulture in which you allow a few wild plants to cohabitate with the vine, it means that you can hold a good plant biodiversity in the vineyard. And hence, if you have this, you have also a good biodiversity of insects, micro mammals, and so on.
So these are the existing solutions to fight these changes.
Now, clearly, and now it's a trend that is starting to grow, and it's a really good thing. I remember my parents talking about that a few decades back. The fact that our vineyard region, in some places, you have it's almost like a gigantic monoculture of vine, and that trees, hedges need to be maintained within the landscape. And I say maintain because it was like that. When you look at old pictures of whether it's Burgundy, Champagne, Bordeaux, you name it, if we stay in the old world anyway, Italy and so on, you realize that even the most famous wine producing region always had a patchwork of little orchards, little stone walls, and little meadows where you'll have you cut up the hay for the animals, because we didn't have tractors. We had horses and cows to work the soil, so you needed to feed those animals. So vineyards were not just a massive sea of vines. You had a lot of diversity, and we have standardized again. Like viticulture has followed the same path as most of agriculture. And now people are saying, oh, but hang on, there are a lot of ecosystemic services that can be brought by restoring this biodiversity within the vineyards. And it has impacts on soil erosion, on carbon lockup, and so on. So viticulture, to me, has a lot of the tools to be resilient and to be able to face those challenges. But the one worry I have is with the hailstorms, these kind of things. You can have the most virtuous vineyard in the world. If you keep getting a hailstorm year after year, it's going to be hard economically to maintain your vineyard.
Now, what solutions in viticulture that do not exist yet could we imagine to fight this climate change?
I think among the solution is gaining back genetic diversity within the vineyards, because unfortunately the introduction of clones in vineyards worldwide has decreased the genetic diversity of the vines. And when you do this, I mean, it's really great from a winemaking point of view, and you get much more homogeneous vineyards, and that has all sorts of advantages. But one of the big disadvantages of this is that when you get more spring frost, when you get all those type of events, a lot of rainfall, you have plants that are not as well equipped to fight those problems. And gaining back in genetic diversity means you're going to have plants, populations of vines that will be, you can select them so that you will still keep the same grape variety, but you can have them to do the bud spurt a little bit later, so you protect yourself from spring frost. You can also have vines that have less ability to build up sugar levels in the grapes. You can have also vines where the the foliage and the shoots are a little bit stronger. So when you get heavy wind or big rain, it helps protect them. You get less damage from those events. So that will be one point. The other one is where the technology is for sure very interesting, is when it comes to building up machines that will help maintain the vineyards without compacting the soil, but with also being more precise in the way we work. I'm not necessarily thinking about robots and unmanned machine. I'm just talking about machines that can be quite simple, well built, and which allow a vineyard manager, for example, to manage his vines in a very precise way and in a very reactive way, because I think having organic vineyards in the long run might be the thing we all end up doing. I'm really talking in the long run. If you are organic, the key for organic viticulture, but it's valid in agriculture as well, is you have to be reactive. You have to have machines and organization that allows you to be really quick to intervene in the vineyard before it's critical.
Maybe the use of digital tools as well?
Digital tools, for sure. Some really elegant solutions there. For example, something that I think really interesting is now we are capable with those technology, with the smartphone and to be much better in terms of forecast, weather forecast. Well, today you can set up tools in your vineyards that will be like super efficient to measure hygrometry, the rainfall or the probability of rainfall, and link it with the probability of getting disease like mildew or powdery mildew and so on. These kind of tools, more than getting your GPS on the tractor and so on, these kind of tools I think are really, really interesting, because it will mean even in a non-organic vineyard, it will mean that we can reduce the amount of chemicals that are being used. We can be more precise in what we do.
So eventually we will gain more and more precision, basically.
Yeah, precision, and then and if we do so, we should be able to use less resource. Should be able to use less fuel, less chemicals, and so on. So it's good for the planet.
Last question, Emmanuel, to project in time. What do you expect the taste of the wine to be like in 50 years' time?
I would say for terroir wines, or wines that are really there to express the typicity of the site they are in, and wines that are being produced by vines that have this genetic diversity. I will hope those wines will not be so different from now, because the expression of the terroir, and even though the climate might change, you see that plants are able to adapt to climate change. I mean, I have a personal experience with my vineyard where we have only massal selection. And although it's a young vineyard, I realized, for example, within our Cabernet Franc, within our Malbec, that years where like 2020 and 2019 and 22 might be like that as well. Those vintage where you get like a lot of sunshine and you get the potential for getting a lot of alcohol and not a really good tannin maturity, because your pH is dropping so quickly that you have to harvest the grapes. And yet, I noticed that during those vintage, I have heaps of individuals. It's almost like they are adapting to it. Like when you taste the grape, you're like, oh, hang, this one is not ripe yet. The acidity is still really high, and you realize the plant reaches its maturity later than the other ones. And when you start to select plants like that, and you take the cuttings from those plants and you multiply them in your vineyard, then I think we can just switch the limits and have vines that are capable of producing those grapes where you have this nice balance between the tannin, the acidity, the sugar, and then, of course, all the complexity that the terroir can bring. So that will be, on one hand, I hope those will have this similar taste. On the other hand, if we stay for, let's say, the wines that are produced on a more standard way, or I wouldn't say industrial way, but I think though it's going to be really difficult for those type of models, because we're going to have to switch to other grape varieties that are capable of ripening without getting too much sugar. Unfortunately, we will lose the identity of many vineyards across the world. And of course, I'm thinking of France and Italy and Spain to some degree. You could move some grape variety further north if, like, you can bring Syrah in Burgundy. It will grow fine, and you will get nice balanced wine. There's no question with that. But will you still make a wine that reflects the history and the complexity of Burgundy by not having the Pinot Noir anymore, because you end up with the grapes that have Pinot Noir needs a certain type of maturity. If you exceed this, it's not Pinot Noir anymore. I mean, it's another type of wine. So I think we will get this type of change that will happen, and it's already the case when you see that some grape varieties are now allowed in some appellations. These are adaptation to this climate change. I'm not sure they are the ones that should be driven forward the most. I mean, it's good they exist, but I think we should first exhaust the solution on how do we help our current grape varieties that have been selected in such and such vineyards or terroir. How can we make sure we manage to maintain them there, produce wine that still have this nice balance and profile?
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. One thing is certain is that in the future, viticulture will even more need soil whisperers like you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Bye-bye, Gabrielle.
Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into Wines of the Future. Don't miss the next episode and subscribe to this podcast. You can also leave us a comment and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Vinexposium.